My question for you is, have you ever wondered what decay happens to your brain when you get addicted to a drug of abuse? Well, my name is Sarah Klein, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So drugs of abuse, they're reinforcers, meaning that the behavior associated with obtaining the drug is likely to be repeated. In different drug classes, they have different initial targets within the brain, but most of these occur within the mesocortical limbic region. So activation of the mesocortical limbic dopamine neurons, these are common brain targets for the mechanisms that contribute to the reinforcing agents of addictive drugs. The mesocortical limbic neurons, they originate in the VTA, which stands for the ventral tegmental area, and that's located in the midbrain, and then these neurons project to the cortical in the limbic target regions. So the VTA, it has both dopamine and GABA neurons to innervate the nucleus accumbens in the prefrontal cortex. And the nucleus accumbens neurons, they use GABA and they receive input from the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the thalamus. And then they convey the information that's important for the goal-directed behaviors. The nucleus accumbens neurons, they integrate this information and then transmit it to other brain regions such as the ventral pallidum, the VTA, and the substantia nigra. This transmission is then used for the execution of those goal-directed behaviors. The prefrontal cortex, it influences the circuitry by descending glutamate projections to many targets such as the nucleus accumbens, the VTA, and the substantia nigra. Dopamine, though, it's also important for reinforcement. It is proven that increased levels of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens is the most important for reinforcement, actually. It acts as an interface, the nucleus accumbens does, between the limbic and the cortical regions, important for motivation and for the motor circuits responsible for the execution of the motivated behaviors. Dopamine signals the incentive salience that's attributed to drugs and the related cues that cause the drug to be wanted. It's also possible that dopamine neuron activation is important in learning and in predicting the likelihood of reward. So dopamine may function to shape the behavior and promote learning of adaptive behavior to enable survival. Drugs of abuse, they cause significant rise in dopamine levels compared to the natural activation of dopamine. Often the rush of dopamine is not regulated and not removed by the dopamine transporter like normal when a drug of abuse is taken. For example, cocaine, it blocks the transporter to produce larger and more prolonged increases in the dopamine levels. Unregulated release of dopamine, it causes changes in the receptive neurons to cause a chain reaction of molecular and cellular adaptations. And mesolimbic dopamine neurons, they're thought to co-release glutamate to produce fast excitatory effects in postsynaptic target regions like the nucleus accumbens. Drugs of abuse, they typically rewire neuronal circuits by influencing synaptic plasticity. Addiction is associated with long-lasting changes in the activity of particular neuronal circuits, and this rewiring, it involves the same mechanisms that allow for the learning and the memory cues that I talked about just a minute ago. So activity-dependent forms of plasticity alter the strength of the glutamate synapses. Some drugs, such as nicotine or cannabinoids, they influence the long-term potentiation or the long-term depression directly by altering the excitatory transmission, while other drugs, like psychomotor stimulants, they act indirectly through their effects on protein kinases and other signaling molecules that are involved in the synaptic plasticity. Addiction also changes gene transcription and contributes to the sensitization of adaptations that promote drug taking and contribute to the adaptations that oppose drug taking, making the transcription factors bimodal. Drugs of abuse, they also cause epigenetic changes that alter chromatin through post-translational modification of the histones, and these modifications, they could be acetylation, phosphorylation, or methylation. These changes, they cause increases or decreases in the availability of particular genes for transcription. And then the drugs, they also cause epigenetic changes through stimulation of signaling pathways that activate transcription factors. So based on this information, we see that the addictive brain has physical and chemical changes that cause misfirings and undesired behaviors. Drugs of abuse, they attack neurons in the mesocortical limbic region to change the levels of dopamine in the brain. The drugs also cause changes in the neuronal plasticity and the signaling pathways, so therefore manipulation of epigenetic changes is a possible route for reversing drug-induced neuroadaptations.